Hello, you absolute legends. The release of Doom Eternal is just over a month away, and I couldn't be more excited to see how speedrunners try to destroy this game. Last month I was lucky enough to be invited to Bethesda HQ to play the game for myself, and I have to say it's a pretty mind-blowing game. But more than just caring about the epicness of the game itself, I'm also incredibly interested in finding out the answer to a very important question. Will Doom Eternal be broken? If you've seen speedruns of the previous installment of the franchise, Doom 2016, you'll know that it is a very glitch-heavy run. Players make their way out of bounds on almost every map, and are able to skip the majority of the combat set pieces, which lie at the core of the intended gameplay. But will speedrunners be able to manipulate Doom Eternal in the same way? In my opinion, the answer is no. Now, I'm obviously not a psychic and no one can ever truly predict what kind of game-breaking mechanics will be found, but there are some key differences in the game that make it much harder to pull off the same types of skips we've seen before. And if this is true, and speedruns of Doom Eternal get through the game more or less as intended, things are about to get very crazy. Doom Eternal is an incredibly complex game, with many new movement and combat mechanics being introduced. And not only this, the game is simply huge. I think what we're about to see might be some of the most intense and action-packed speedruns ever, and in this video I'll explain why. I hope you enjoy. Before trying to predict what will happen in Doom Eternal speedrunning, we obviously have to look back at id Software's earlier title, Doom, released in 2016. Now, just for the sake of convenience, I'll be calling the earlier game Doom, and Doom Eternal simply Eternal. Sure, Doom is a different game, but it's developed by the same team, runs on an earlier build of the same engine, and is a direct prequel, so many things will inevitably carry over and be similar between games. You can be sure that the first thing the Doom speedrunners will do, after they have casually dismantled Eternal, is try out the same glitches they've already done in Doom. Doom is a really broken speedrun, and there are several critical techniques that are abused throughout the entire run. In Doom, there is no foreplay. 30 seconds into the run, players are already clipping out of bounds and navigating their way above the map to the end of the first level. This type of out-of-bounds abuse is really common and is used on many of Doom's levels. This is possible because of two key ingredients. The first is paper-thin walls that can be glitched through with relative ease. This factor is actually impossible to predict in Eternal. Whether or not they have made boundaries less susceptible to breaks will be something that we can only find out once speedrunners spend a few hours butting heads with every corner and seam in each level. The second ingredient is a lot more obvious, and that's the level design. Doom has a few levels that feature open outdoor sections, but a lot of Doom's gameplay is concealed indoors. This makes sense given the setting, a research facility on Mars, but it does lend itself to out-of-bounds abuse. Given that a lot of the levels feature so many tight corridors and a logically structured floor plan, this means that once players get beyond the walls, it becomes relatively easy to skip large sections. Obviously, indoor sections feature roofs that allow you to run across if you can get on top of them. The level designs in Eternal are vastly different. When speaking with Bethesda, they specifically mentioned that id Software were looking to move the gameplay further away from the corridor shooter style of previous installments. The levels I've played and seen are enormous and grand in scale, and generally set outdoors. The open level design means it's going to be much harder to skip sections using out-of-bounds glitches, at least in theory. If you did clip out of bounds, you'd have to go around, and given how large these areas are, the odds of finding a safe passage outside of the walls becomes very low. In saying this, there is one glitch that Doom has in its arsenal that may rain on Eternal's parade, and that is rail boosting. Rail boosting is a glitch that allows you to soar into the air at huge heights and speeds, skipping massive sections of the map. This glitch is performed by moving backwards and forwards on rails or specific elevations, and requires the frame rate to be at 200. Whether or not they have fixed this mechanic will be crucial. I'd be very surprised if rail boosting was still possible given that Doom has been out for so many years and they've almost certainly had a chance to see it. There was one interesting moment though where I dashed into an upwards sloping ramp which caused me to get thrown upwards much higher than you can normally jump. We'll talk a bit more about dashing later, but just based on this one instance I think this might be an important trick that allows players to reach heights they shouldn't be able to. The final glitch in Doom that may be game breaking if it works is the glory kill clip. By glory killing a possessed scientist at a precise angle and location, you can clip through doors and even walls to get out of bounds. There are a couple of reasons why I don't think this particular clip is going to be a game changer in Eternal, even if it wasn't fixed. The first reason comes back to level design. As I mentioned earlier, due to the large open nature of the levels, I think even if you did get out of bounds, there would be a low chance you'd be able to maneuver anywhere useful. But the second reason, and the one that is less speculative, is the fact that the enemies in Eternal seem to be much more dangerous and much less predictable. Sure, there are a few of the typical slower, relatively harmless meat shields thrown in. The zombies are more or less there to help you replenish ammo and health by performing glory kills. But generally, as soon as you get into a combat situation, you're going to be dealing with very dangerous creatures like the Arachnotron. Even the gold standard Doom mobs like the imps and soldiers pose a great threat. They are extremely quick, agile, unpredictable, and need to be addressed. There really weren't many combat sequences I recall where I actually had time to stop and think, let alone would be able to wait for a zombie to slowly walk into position so I could clip out of bounds with it. That's not to say that clips won't be possible, but I'd wager that combat won't be avoidable, and at the very least players will need to actually kill monsters lest they get ripped to shreds. Furthermore, Eternal makes much more use of portals to separate locations. The thing that makes portals much more conducive to combat is they don't actually appear until every enemy is dead. If the only thing that separates two areas is a thin physical obstruction, this lends itself to being broken by clips. Portals don't appear at all, so they can't be clipped through, and they don't lie immediately between two areas, so a clip would be useless anyway. This makes it much more difficult to skip sections. It is for these reasons that I predict Eternal speedrunning will be much more combat focused, and if I'm right, these runs will be insane. The terrain that combat takes place in is pretty ridiculous, featuring tons of platforms of various heights to jump around on. The enemies themselves traverse obstacles seamlessly, unimpaired by cliffs or gaps, meaning that you'll have to master the movement that Eternal offers. There will be absolutely no hiding or camping. This brings me to a couple of major changes in Eternal that will make speedruns even more interesting and complex. The first is the increased focus on platforming. Gone are the predictable corridors that separate combat set pieces. Eternal is littered with platforms, walls to climb, and beams to swing off. This exponentially increases the amount of different possible movement patterns, which will make problem solving, strategy, and skill of movement a much larger factor. As well as all of the new obstacles, Eternal also introduces the dash mechanic. This single feature is going to blow the game wide open. The Doomslayer can now dash twice on a cooldown. This will be applicable everywhere, both in combat and also progressing through levels and navigating tricky parkour sections. Again, this adds more complexity to Eternal's movement and raises the skill cap. Players will need to be conscious of the cooldown at all times, making sure they waste no time between dashes. I think this will open the door to a few potential skips and unintended mechanics as well. Assuming Eternal is going to be much more combat intensive, this will make all of the combat mechanics and tech a lot more important. Aside from your weapon of choice, you also have the chainsaw to replenish ammo, the blood punch which builds energy with glory kills and then releases a powerful melee attack, the flame belch which sets enemies on fire who will then provide armor when killed, and the frag grenade and ice bomb which are on another cooldown. Every weapon has its own tech tree that you can customize to your playstyle. Your flame belch can also be upgraded and customized. Speedrunners do sometimes have a habit of skipping upgrades for the sake of speed, but if combat is a major part of these runs, upgrades are going to play a large part, and finding out which ones are the best for speed is going to require a lot of planning. At any one time, there will be multiple cooldowns to keep track of, and so many different options for killing demons that finding the optimal way to dispatch enemies in the quickest time is going to be a very long and involved process. The speedruns that only have the goal of getting to the end of the game will obviously skip a lot of content, but for the 100% category things are going to be hectic. Not only are there a ton of secrets to collect, but Eternal also introduces Slayer Gates. These portals take the Slayer to a separate location for a royal rumble of intense combat. If all else fails and the rest of the game gets completely broken somehow, I know I can count on these Slayer Gates to provide the combat we need. I attempted to complete one and I got absolutely destroyed. Though I must admit, I do suck at any game made after the year 2000. Speedrunning aside, the game was amazing to play. The environments, music, controls, and level designs are phenomenal. Unfortunately, I only had a few hours to play it, so I couldn't do what I normally do when I like a game, which is to take my time and explore every single inch. I tried to get through as much as I could, but the game is hard. Even on Hurt Me Plenty, I was dying a lot. Every weapon and attack cooldown needs to be utilized as much as possible, or you're going to have a tough time. When Eternal does come out next month and we get to see some speedrunning action, I will be there to cover it every step of the way. If you're interested in seeing how Doom Eternal gets broken, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as I will definitely be doing breakdowns on all of the discoveries. Now before I end the video, I actually have some pretty epic news. Back in December, I launched the E1M1 UV Max Challenge, where I asked viewers to complete the first level of the original Doom in less than 36 seconds. Not only that, but you needed to unlock every secret and kill every monster. Well, the turnout was incredible, with over 250 people submitting runs. Not only that, but the world record itself was beaten twice. When the challenge was launched, it was 4 Shock Blast who held the record at 28 seconds, set on the 5th of September 2016. This run was really good considering how much RNG was involved in the run, but it was far from perfect and there were some obvious areas for improvement. The only question was if anyone would actually be able to pull off a good run and get the shotgun luck they needed. Surprisingly, the world record was actually broken by a Doom speedrunner who didn't even know the challenge was happening. On the 11th of January, old school runner Vile achieved 27 seconds. Then, in the very same day, newcomer Intuition tied the record with another 27. This was a huge shock, as Intuition was unknown in the Doom speedrunning community. It was awesome to see some new blood come in and do really well. Meanwhile, in the background, throughout all of January, a Doom phenom was grinding hard. Depravity, whom I mentioned in my Doom video Into the Void, was spending hours each day trying to get the record as low as possible. On the 13th of January, he did manage to snag a 27 of his own, but he didn't stop there. Despite saying that he wouldn't go for 26 unless someone else achieved it, he must have had a change of heart. After 100 hours of attempts over the course of 20 days, on the 24th of January 2020, Depravity achieved this run. Just so you know, I am now doing monthly AMA videos through Patreon and YouTube memberships. So if you want me to respond directly to questions or video suggestions, feel free to support me through either of those channels. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.